Great. Welcome to South Asia Lecture Series hosted by the Riverine Rights here at Oslo Metropolitan University. We've progressed towards almost towards the end of the series that we started in mid-August. Today is the second last lecture in what would be the last lecture next week. Before introducing our distinguished speaker today, I'd say something about the series. So the series is a part of a longer thought process that has gone into thinking about environmental histories and politics in South Asia in general and India in particular. In the spring term, we've had a seminar series which hosted a number of PhDs and postdoc who presented parts of their research on histories and politics around environment. This series is drawn out of that. The former series was called Perceptions of Environment. This series is called Imagining the Environment. This series is different from the former in a way that it includes a number of speakers, mostly distinguished academics, activists, as well as journalists. So far, we've had about 9 talks. All of them have been recorded. So some of you who may have missed 1 or 2, do not fret. You will have most of the recording available. What I would do is create another tweet thread and have each talk framed to the speaker aligned. I'm Rahul Ranjan. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow here at the Oslo Metropolitan University, and I work for the Riverine Rights project. Within this project, I look at role of memory grief in relation to rights of river. And within the large project, we look at 3 case study of river rights in Colombia, New Zealand, and India. I'm very honored and happy that Professor Münster has accepted our request to speak today. Before I introduce him, just one logistical clarification. You can ask your question in 2 ways. One is to write your question into the chat box, and I'll have the question read at the end of the conversation and during the Q&A session. The second is to use the emoji sign and raise your hand, and I'll have you unmuted. You can ask your question yourself. So to introduce Daniel, Daniel Münster received his PhD in social and cultural anthropology from LMU, Munich in 2005, and completed his habilitation, which is equals to postdoc or second PhD in 2019 from Heidelberg University in cultural anthropology again. Between 2013 to 2018, he was the leader of the junior research group called Agrarian Alternatives, Agrarian Crisis, Global Concerns, and Contested Agroecological Futures in South Asia at the Cluster of Excellence, Asia and Europe in Global Context at Heidelberg University in Germany. He's taught at several institutions and universities across Germany. Daniel Münster is currently an associate professor of medical anthropology at University of Oslo here in Oslo, Norway. His broader area of interest and research is located at the intersection of medical and environmental anthropology. Drawing on ethnography and historical anthropology, he studies power, health, ecology in contemporary world. So far, his work has focused on rural communities in the global south. Daniel's ethnographic work with small holder farmers in South Asia, South India, explores the possibility for an alternative agriculture based on decolonial and ecological understanding of people and their non-human others, including plants, animals, microbes, and soil. Writing on such issues as farmer suicide, pesticides, food scars, landscape changes, fermentation, and alternative agriculture, he studies the possibility for health and recuperation for people and their environment in a world threatened by ecological destruction and political economic crises. We're very humbled as part of the larger project, but personally to have Professor Daniel accept our request to speak today. So Daniel, you would have about 40 minutes to speak. After that, we would have about 25 minutes for Q&A. So yeah, welcome.
All right. Thank you so much, Rahul. I was really looking forward today. I feel sorry that I was unable to attend most of your lectures. It's really a missed opportunity. Anyways, it's so great to have you in Oslo, Rahul. That is really a great addition. Yes, I think I'll jump right in. This is hopefully my last apology for today. I had a full day of screen time on a search committee for a new PhD position, so I'm not at my most fluent, I think. But let's just do it. So you can see me and see my slides, see me and hear me well, I suppose. Yes. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So what I'm going to present to you today is the link between what I have been doing so far, and I'm hoping to get your input on how I might push this project forward now that I've moved to the medical faculty, and where I really need to think of how to frame my research interests in terms of health. So the notion of modern human health is kind of as far as I go at the moment in adapting the language of One Health or other medicalized ways of incorporating the environment. Just today, a Lancet commission of a global countdown about health and climate was launched. So there's quite a bit of work being done here at that intersection. Rahul, when you said your series is about imagining the environment, my work is very much about imagining agrarian environments. And what I'm going to present today is about imagining below ground environments, soils in particular, and how soils and people are entangled as a unity of health, as an endangered unity of health. So my research was based for the last decade now, I must say, in the South Indian district of Wayanad, located in the state of Kerala, but bordering the states of Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. The state is quite famous for being surrounded by forests. So the map you see on the bottom left shows you the forested areas of Wayanad, which makes it a tourist destination at least for domestic tourism. I came first to the region studying an epidemic of suicides by small-scale farmers. So I never had the luxury of having a tourist gaze onto that landscape. Instead, I was drawn immediately to the contradictions of its small-scale agriculture. So what you need to know about that in historical terms is that the region is the location of an internal migration, of an internal colonization, you could say in more analytical terms, of lowland communities, and many of them are Syrian Christian or Syrian Catholic communities who were living in their region that during colonial times was in the semi-independent kingdom of Travancore. I include here that the historical map of the Madras province, just to highlight the differences in land relations that made it possible after the end of the Second World War, after independence, to have a huge land rush to the region. Those of you who know a bit more, it was because there was a different kind of settlement. Under Madras rules, the entire forest was given as private property to either temples or former aristocrats. And that meant that these lands were paradoxically less protected for in turn for this kind of land rush that happened a bit later. So the recent or the agrarian history, the land relations and also the human soil relations were characterized by what I call cycles of boom and bust. So different crops had cycles of being in very high demand, and especially among the settler community, this led to several waves of completely redoing the styles of agriculture. What you see in this slide is vanilla, which had a very short hype in Wayanad. Pepper, on the other hand, is endemic in the region and was one of the crops that was behind the first stories about suicide and about agrarian crisis in the region. Not because pepper failed, but on the contrary, because the pepper prices were so high at some point in the 1980s, where it was called the black gold, that many farmers remodeled their homestead gardens into pepper monocultures. And these pepper monocultures were then affected by Phytophthora slime molds and other diseases because they were grown in monocultures. And that was the first wipe out of a style of doing agriculture. And in some of my earlier work, I show how several such cycles of boom crops and which reach their ecological limits or their ecological contradictions, and that then contribute to despair, indebtedness, and so on. The image on the right is a more recent phenomenon that is a speculative growing of, and also very extractive growing of banana on actually former wet rice fields. So from an ecological point of view, what we see also is how wetlands, which have a lot of important ecological functions, are increasingly converted to dry lands for the purpose of speculative and extractive agriculture. And banana in particular requires a high input of fertilizers and artificial fertilizers and pesticides, and particularly also pesticides that are used late in the production process. Yes, so what I've studied for quite a while are these treadmills of pesticides, fertilizers, and credits that contribute. And here in the middle picture, you see a banana trader next to a fertilizer trader, which is a quite telling image of how these two crops are closely related. And furadan is a carbofuran that is a systemic pesticide that is very much used in the production of banana. And the connection to my earlier work was that it is also the main poison used for committing suicide in the region. And it's because of the particular type of seasonality, it is available throughout the year. There are no proper off and on seasons, so farmers have these very toxic substances in their homes at all times. Another extractive human soil relation that I studied in quite in depth is that of ginger cultivation. Ginger cultivation was developed in response to the first crisis of pepper, actually by former pepper farmers. So it came a bit later in the early 90s and is still an ongoing enterprise. Now, what happened here was that farmers or farming communities from Wayanad expanded their frontier, so to speak. in the sense that they leased lands in neighboring states. Here you see images from Karnataka, from the plains around Mysore, where they engaged in these extremely speculative ginger cultivations. Now, ginger has, as you all know, is a rhizome and has the capacity to stay in the soil very long, but it is also very much endangered by another slime mold. I think it's also a Phytophthora, the one you see in the top right. So what is remarkable about those agrarian practices is that they knowingly exploit the soil. So each of these fields can be cultivated only for a single season. And then farmers know they have to move on because they have simply dumped too much chemicals into these soils, and because the risk of infecting with pathogens becomes too high after the second year. So in a way, it has developed a rolling frontier of soil use or of land use that moved from the neighborhood of Wayanad all the way north and has now reached Goa and Maharashtra, and is really this extractive frontier of speculative ginger production. The image in the center, I will not go into it too much, shows a bit the dynamic of suicide also, if you know how to read it well, because the speculation increases, or the risk increases manifold with the second year, when the rhizomes are still in the soil, but the new loans, new credit has to be acquired for the next seasons. Anyway, this is for another talk maybe. What I wanted to highlight only is that the history of agriculture has really produced what I call ecologies of farmer suicide. This is my work from beginning 2012, where I followed these stories and first looked at state relations, the politics of farmer suicide, how it became a political issue, but later tried to ecologize it more and more. Yes, and so it is a statement like this that I think you will understand by now. It is all because of chemical farming. Rasa krishi would be the Malayalam term. When my pepper died because of quick wilt, the Phytophthora slime molds I mentioned, I suspect that something is wrong with the health, arogyam of the soil, manna. Our farmers destroy the soil with chemical fertilizers and pesticides. So when I entered the scene in 2018, this was, at least by a section of the farming community, the predominant sentiment that something went profoundly wrong with the way we approach soil, the way we do agriculture, and there is an urgent need to do something differently. And so what I then studied in the later part of my postdoctoral work was what I call agronomical pluralism. This is a term I formed in analogy to medical pluralism. I think everyone who's worked on India knows quite well what that is, that you have separate medical traditions next to each other, and that in any case of illness, it is up to the patient to navigate how to seek care. What is less known is that we have the same type of pluralism, different sciences of agriculture, so to speak, available in parallel in India as well. And I follow here the classification offered by farmers in Kerala. They distinguish between chemical farming, organic farming, and natural farming. You may wonder what the difference between organic and natural farming is. Just briefly, with organic farming, they talk about certified organic. That is a reintroduction of organic ways via the West, or rather via Western markets. So it is an agriculture of rules and regulations. It's about certification. It is about substituting certain chemical input with organic input. Whereas I'm going to zoom in now on what they call Prakriti Krishi in Malayalam, or natural farming, which is really, according to these farmers, an entirely different paradigm of relating to soil and doing agriculture. Yes, so these are some of the proponents of what we might call Prakriti Krishi, so of natural farming. So not all of these are, in a way, really different schools of doing natural farming. It is not that they all talk about the same thing. And most of them also have rather regional reach only, right? So Nammalwar is quite important for Tamil Nadu. He is the person I had most contact with in my doctoral research when I studied in Tamil Nadu, whereas Bhaskar Save and MS Deshpande, I think they're both based in Maharashtra and have more on a central Indian reach. Yes, so what I want to do, what really interests me, is to connect what these guys are talking about, what these farmers are doing, to recent shifts in cultural theory. Cultural theory at the intersection of science and technology studies, multi-species anthropology, and medical anthropology. And that is really a quite recent focus on microbes, on processes of symbiosis, on, with Jamie Lorimer here, a probiotic understanding of health and ecology. He calls it using life to manage life. That is the basic idea behind it. But also earlier work like that of Stefan Helmreich, of course, one of the pioneers of microbial anthropology, in his case, focusing on oceans and ocean ecologies and ocean life in the ocean. So this may be a bit of a jump now, but what I'm really interested in articulations, you know, on how our natural farming ways of making sense of the world articulate or don't articulate with our sensibilities in anthropology and related disciplines. That takes what we call the material semiotics of these invisible species more serious. Yes, so another concept that has been quite important for me was that of the holobiont. The holobiont is one of, so in a way I'm looking for these linking concepts between health and ecology, and the holobiont is the most obvious one. It is an entirely new understanding of an organism as kind of as distributed at the level of microbes. So it's an understanding of a microbe plus its of an organism plus its microbial ecology surrounding it. I think this will be, I hope it will be more clearer where I'm getting at a bit later in my presentation. Yes. Another strand of my research is about fermentation. So I'm throwing these out here before I come back to my case. because one of the ways these farmers relate to soil is through fermentation. And we have just published a special issue on fermentation in Current Anthropology that features many of these authors here. Yes, and finally, a really new strand of thinking is the anthropology of soil. I'm part of a group of researchers here at the University of Oslo who want to develop humanities approaches to soil. We call this group anthropogenic soil, and most of us are interested in the ways it's possible to recuperate or to restore degraded soils, and what kind of imaginative work goes into such a recuperative work. Yes. So when working with these natural farmers, I am interested in how they manage to develop a soil, not only an idea about soil, but really how they do soil differently. And here, of course, I draw on STS literatures and the idea of world making as a practice. Yes. Yeah. So the argument I'm trying to develop in this talk is that through certain practices, and here I'm talking about fermentation practices, a new ontology of soil is being enacted. And that this ontology, I hope to be able to call decolonial, relational, multi-species, symbiotic, and so on. And metabolic is, of course, quite important. With the holobiont concept also stands for a shift in understanding of health as large and of organisms as largely metabolic, as constantly reproduced through contacts with the outside world. Yes, I also argue that these understandings of soil are new, novel, in the context of these devastations I have briefly sketched before, suicides and pathogens in the soil, and so on. The third point is that along with these novel practices and these novel understandings comes a language that is non-secular, for a lack of a better term. And I'm interested in the implications of such a non-secular language and metaphors and ways of talking about soil. So whether it's traditional or indigenous or non-Western or ancient wisdom, so all those kinds of registers of talking about agriculture as a science interests me. And of course, the dark side of that return to traditional knowledge, which is Hindu right-wing biopolitics. Here I use the term bionativism in my recent writings. With bionativism, I mean something that it's similar to what Bhanu Subramanian calls bionationalism in her recent work. I just think that nativism, in the sense of belonging, of being native to a place, is more important in natural farming than the nation state or the idea of India as a nation, for better or for worse. Yes, so this is the problem space. So of all these natural farming movements, So this is a bit misleading here in this publication. They talk about different terms used for chemical-free agriculture. I would insist that they are really entirely different in terms of different agronomies, in terms of agronomical pluralism, that they're not just different ways of doing the same, but really have entirely different, not all of them, but many of them entirely different ontologies of human-soil relations. Yes, so I do in the third line, the zero budget. So I zoom in again on this person and this movement. It is led, as you can see, by a person called Subhash Palekar. Oh, I'm sorry, there's an H missing in my slide. In Subhash, a person born in 1949 in Maharashtra, and he is an agronomist and also farmer, who, according to his own self-description, now leads the biggest natural farming movement. He claims to have, I think, 30 million followers in India, which is of course not a verified number. Yeah, what is important about him is that he is a prolific writer. He has these 3 books in English. He's translated into several Indian languages. And what he developed is a system that rests on 4 pillars or 4 wheels. And he calls them Bijamrita, Jivamrita, mulching, and Warfasa. I think mulching is pretty clear. It just means covering the soil at all times with straw, with mulching. This is a technology that is widely known in organic gardening. Warfasa is his theory of soil, and especially soil texture and soil moisture. It is mostly his idea that tilling needs to be avoided at all costs, but rather that a good soil structure should be developed through farming. I want to zoom in on the second one, actually, which is Jivamrita, or the Nectar of Life. Bijamrita is it's also fermented, but it's slightly less interesting because it is really only used for preparing seeds. Whereas Jivamrita, what I call the nectar, actually it's the translation, what he calls the Nectar of Life, is really a central ingredient in revitalizing soils in that natural farming movement. And what I want to do for the rest of this paper, my presentation, is to talk about the ingredients. So we learn about that methodology by participating in workshops. Subhash Palekar is, at least before the pandemic, and all of my research stopped with the pandemic, so I don't have an update for you. He tours the country and gives week-long workshops or seminars, during which he fills an entire auditorium. And it is really lecturing. It is very academic in the sense that these small-scale farmers, as you see here, fill notebook after notebook with theory and explanation, and also with recipes. Here in this particular instance, you see him lecturing about one of his main theoretical contributions when it comes to cows, where he teaches and explains how Bos indicus, the Indian cow, the native Indian cow, is different from Bos taurus, the foreign cow. And because he insists that his system of natural farming works only and exclusively with purebred Indian cows. So only the Indian cow has the material and also perhaps symbolic properties necessary to really save Indian agriculture. Yes, so at these workshops, farmers are called upon to really change their life. They're supposed, they take vows, they stand up several times during this week-long, raise their hand and swear to become protectors of nature. And really, it is almost like a conversion. What is there behind is that it's a and the movement is also called zero budget spiritual farming, not only natural farming. And so here is a Palika quote, by the way. There will be a beginning of dramatic and miraculous changes in your behavior automatically. You will be internally changed. Your bad habits also will be continuously run over. So the bad English is not mine, it's in the original. So absolute cultivation of mind. Spiritual farming means to overall change you yourself. The internal change and external change happen, I guess, simultaneously. So yeah, so that gives you an idea of how natural farming really is a conversion that gets these small farmers outside of their commercial ways of doing agriculture into something different. And I hope to show you something different. Yes, so as I said, I want to zoom in on the nectar of life. And I want to work with the recipe. And the recipe here, I understand both in a culinary sense, like how to do it, but also in a medical sense, the recipe you take to the pharmacy, or the recipe that contributes to the healing process. Yeah. So kindly go through these ingredients with me, and in the last 5 to 10 minutes that I have, I want to focus particularly on sugar as an ingredient and on the native, very important, native cow dung. Yes, so this recipe, very important for natural farming, is that it is natural. So the forests serve as a kind of model nature for farming in this natural farming system. So here is a typical statement by Palika, where he reflects on the mango tree. So in the forest, the fruit tree of mango or any other tree is growing and giving enormous, uncountable export quality fruits every year. Export is one of his many jokes that he makes about mainstream agronomy when he incorporates terms like export quality into his explanations. Without cultivation, without manure, fertilizers and spraying, hybrid seeds, irrigation, without any human assistance. So here you already see in a nutshell what natural farming means. It means that Indian soils are by themselves plentiful, productive, and really don't need any human assistance. So it's all already there in nature. And the only job farmers have is to assist the processes in nature. So the first ingredient I want to talk about is symbiosis. Yes, sugar, and I call it the currency of symbiosis. So as a criteria for Palika, sugar, of course, has to be natural. He talks about how sugar sends specific scent messages of specific wavelengths to inhabitants of the soils. Sugar is important because it feeds microbes and because it mimics plant exudates. This is now my language. So what Palika really translates here, or what he articulates in a very well, I'll use the term non-secular. In a non-secular way, articulates very well with theories about plant exudates. And that is really the carbohydrates that roots release in the rhizosphere to create microbial communities that are beneficial to the plants. And here you can see how Palika talks about it. If it is the truth that nature has provided the sweet sugar to the soil microorganisms, right, as exudates, and the question arises in our mind, why do we not provide or make provision of sugar with the desi cow dung and urine? Definitely we have to do it. And to feed the sweet sugar for soil microorganisms for symbiosis and to multiply the soil biota. These activities are existing in nature. That means to use the sweet in Jivamrita is 100% natural. So here you see the logic that only natural ingredients can be used and how they mimic processes already ongoing in nature. The next step in understanding is then how these microbes that are multiplied in doing Jivamrita create a complex whole that involves several species: the cow, the plant, and all the billions of species that are present in soil into a single circle or into a single network. Here you see one of the natural farmers, one of my main informants, show how earthworms, and of course only talking about Indian earthworms, are attracted by the cow dung of native cows. So they also make quite a big story about how the dung of native cows is different from the dung of European or hybrid cows. And these little holes you see, I hope, in the image are indicators of earthworm activities, and the greatest pride of most natural farmers, because earthworms were also the first to die when fields became salty after too much chemical input. Yes. So another example of how here is a non-secular and scientific language is combined. So desi cow dung is an ocean of effective microorganisms. Another joke about organic farming here. Effective microorganisms, as you may know, is a Japanese product you can buy for organic farming to speed up microbial processes, which are converters. So we have read in our ancient literature that the desi cow has in its intestines 33 crores of devas or gods. I think that these 33 crore gods are actually species of effective microorganisms which are beneficial for soil biological saturation. Yes, so with the introduction of desi cow dung or native Indian cow dung, we come back to the slide I showed you earlier about Palika teaching about the differences. So he makes this is not him, this is taken from a Facebook group of natural farmers. who make this really who overblow the distinction between European, both Taurus and both Indicus cows, to the sense that they argue these are two different species, and that one is only really one is suitable and is also a real cow. So it is very common to have all kinds of tests performed to see if your cow is actually a native cow. One of the consequences has been that native cows have been rediscovered in southern India after they have gone near extinct. That is also a story for another day, because that is also extremely interesting. It's connected to the White Revolution and the hybridization push for milk production, the so-called White Revolution. Yeah. So what I'm getting at really is that with the fermentation of Jivamrita provides these small-scale farmers with a theory and also a very concrete recipe, so to speak, for how to restore their soils. And the important thing here to note is that they insist that this Jivamrita is not a fertilizer. It does not feed plants, but it feeds soil. It feeds microbes. It's a way of communicating with your soil microbes, making them happy, making them also happy. And here you see also the green cover rather than open earth. That is mulching, one of the other principles. And really important, no other input is required. So the theory, the soil theory that emerges here, or the imaginary that emerges here, is that soils are naturally fertile. There's no deficiency at all, and that they only need some type of reawakening, I call it here, or an activation through that. Okay, I'm not sure I should go through that. Just read it. It's too much text. Don't read it. This is an example of how Palika challenges agronomy and certain really core principles of agronomy, such as the pH value, the acidity, the relative acidity of soil, which to him makes no sense at all, because it makes no sense to nature. Yeah. So if you get a test result, let's say 8.5, okay, we can read the second half together maybe. After reading this sentence, thanks. What instructions or perceptions have you received? Have you experienced about the thirst in the soil, about the pain of the soil, about the hunger of the soil, about the happiness of the soil, about the needs or wishes of the soil? Nothing. Only the word pH, right? So it is really about the flat ontology of science, so to speak, and the liveliness, almost anthropogenic. No, what's the word? Anthropomorphic liveliness of soil. Yeah. So, yes. Okay. I think last slide. This is the theory of Holy Mother Soil, Annapurna exemplified, where the idea is that you have all these they have the ocean of nutrients at the bottom, which is the mineral layer of soil, that only need to be activated. And you have several species who work together in this process. Yes, activation, only using Jivamrita. So, conclusion, I call it pro-microbial resistance. I don't know if that makes any sense. Yes, well, more than human health in this becomes a multi-species affair. Natural farmers are ambivalent partners for an anthropology of the otherwise, not least because of their use of Hindu nationalist tropes. The unknown and uncertainty of below-ground microbial life engenders metaphor, miracle, wonder, spirituality, and hope. Fermentation is narrative and a material practice of doing soil, so this is also quite important. And fermentation reconnects farmers to nature understood as symbiotic, enchanted, godly, and of course, Hindu supremacist, maybe. Yes, and the anthropology of fermentation can contribute, I hope, to an anthropology of recuperation, as Haraway puts it, as modest possibilities of partial recuperation and getting on together. Okay, so thank you very much. And I really look forward to your comments now.